Thank you, everyone. Okay. I'm pinch hitting today for Representative Krajewski, who unfortunately is ill and not able to join us. So I'll be fulfilling his role as chair. We'll call the meeting to order. Do we need to do attendance first, or?
And in person, we have Judge Marsico and Judge King and ex officio member Secretary Harry. Online, Ryan?
Online, we have Attorney Balkovac, Professor Rago, DA Bible, and Judge Taylor Smith.
All right. Is that good to hear? We have a quorum. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here today. Our first matter of business would be public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time?
If there's anyone in our virtual waiting room for public comment, we just ask that you raise your virtual hand. I don't see any, Judge.
All right. We see no public comment. Next matter is an action item. That's approval of the December 4th, 2025 quarterly business meeting minutes. I know they were distributed to us all. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make the motion, DA Bible.
All right, so moved. Is there a second?
Second, Rago.
All right, we have a motion and second. Any debate on approval of the minutes? I see and hear none. So we'll call it for a vote. All those in favor of approving the December 4th, 2025 quarterly business meeting minutes indicate by saying aye.
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 Any nays? No negative votes, so they are approved. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Kleiman.
Thank you. Again, good morning, everyone. And I'd like to start my executive update by noting the passing of Professor Al Bloomstein, who was a former dean at the Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon and a commission member from 1985 to 1995. Professor Bloomstein was, quoting from his obituary in the New York Times, an intellectual giant in criminology who used mathematical models to reveal the systemic patterns of crime, fundamentally shaping a field that had long relied on anecdotal evidence and sociological theory. I've taken the liberty of inviting former Sentencing Commission Chair Professor Steve Chanenson and former Executive Director Mark Bergstrom to pay tribute to Professor Bloomstein's legacy and his impact on the work of the Commission and the criminal justice policies and practices in the Commonwealth. So I will turn it over to Professor Chanenson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak briefly about the remarkable Al Bloomstein. As Dr. Kleiman said, my name is Steve Chanenson. I'm a professor of law at Villanova University Charles Widger School of Law, and from 2002 until 2015, it was my honor to serve as the then gubernatorial appointee to the law professor or criminologist seat on the Commission on Sentencing. For my last 2 years, I served as chair of the commission. Like all of you, when I was appointed to the position, I understood that it carried great responsibility for the continual improvement of the Commonwealth criminal justice system, or in the language of our statute, your statute, make recommendations in pursuit of effective, humane, and rational sentencing, resentencing, and parole policy. But my job carried a heavier weight. Because, as Dr. Kleiman said, from 1985 to 1995, Al Bloomstein held the professorial appointment to the commission. He left those of us who followed him with big shoes to fill. I never succeeded in doing so, but Al was such a legendary figure that he always provided inspiration for me to try harder and to do better. A prominent sentencing scholar from the University of Minnesota named Richard Fraze captured it perfectly at a conference when he once referred to me as occupying the Al Bloomstein seat on the commission. That remains a perfect description. 4 of us have been in that role since Al left, but for my money, it remains the Al Bloomstein seat. Of course, I knew about Al long before I joined the commission. all of us should know Al because he revolutionized our field starting in the 1960s and kept doing so for more than 50 years. Mark Bergstrom will talk more about this and the wonderful New York Times obituary that Dr. Kleiman referred to is something I hope you read, because it's hard to overstate Al's significance to criminal justice in our state, our nation, and the world. I'm going to mention just a couple of snapshots. First, even long after leaving the commission in the 1990s, Al remained engaged with and supportive of the commission. Frankly, he did so for the rest of his life. For example, we started the strategic planning work group in approximately 2013 or 2014, depending on how you calculate it, which is kind of like the commission's founding date, by the way. You'll see 1979 on the seal of the commission, but the legislation was actually passed in 1978. You can see that I'm a bit of a sentencing nerd. We invited Al to join us on that working group, and of course he agreed. And unsurprisingly, he offered penetrating insights and suggested innovative solutions. As you also know, I partner with the Commission and AOPC to run the Villanova Sentencing Workshop every spring semester. One part of the workshop involves dinner speakers, and we've had an all-star cast of speakers over the years, including a former governor, multiple Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices, secretaries of corrections, including Secretary Harry, parole board chairs, including Chair Fox, PA legislatures, formerly incarcerated individuals, and more. Just weeks before the COVID shutdown in February of 2020, Al, at about the age of 90, made the trip from Pittsburgh to be with us. He was probably supposed to be at some other convention, but he was with us. He was as sharp as ever and discussed his still crucial work on criminal careers and redemption that I think Mark will also mention. But that was Al, always showing up, always brilliant. But there's one last thing that you should know. He was always kind. Remember, Al was a big deal. I mean, a really big deal. Yet he was the most unassuming, generous, and supportive colleague, if I have the temerity to call myself a colleague of Al Bloomstein's, the most that you can imagine. Now, even though I'm a law professor, I enjoy attending the American Society of Criminology's annual meeting from time to time, as they care about the same issues we do, but use different tools and strategies to address them. This meeting draws thousands of researchers from around the world. Especially in that setting, Al was a legend. He was in high demand. I went to one of those meetings as a new professor about 25 years ago. Of course, I knew about Al. Everyone did. There was no reason he should have known me. By that time, I may have helped to edit one of his pieces for a sentencing journal that I helped to run, but we hadn't had any significant interactions. I saw him at a panel. I screwed up the courage to approach him and ask him about some pedestrian paper or theory that I had in my head. He stopped what he was doing, focused on me, and seriously engaged with my questions. Even when he saw flaws in my approach, and there were, and often are, many, his comments were constructive. He was both rigorous and supportive. Obviously, that kindness has stuck with me for a quarter century. Now, you may wonder why. Everybody should be kind, right? And we should. But as a group, we often aren't. And that is especially true, I'm sad to say, in academia. People who become big deals in the academy too often believe their own press clippings and are aloof, dismissive of, and sometimes downright rude to those whom they believe are beneath them, however defined. That may be why Al's kindness, his decency, made such an impact on me and so many. Now, it may be a cliche, but sometimes cliches are cliches because there's truth there. Thanks to Al Bloomstein, the Commission on Sentencing and the Commonwealth at large have the privilege of standing on the shoulders of giants. So, here's to Al Bloomstein, and may his memory be a blessing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Steve, as well, for those comments. I met Al Bloomstein in the early 1990s when he was a member of the commission and I was a new staff member. From that first meeting, And for over 3 decades that followed, my experience mirrors that of Professor Chanenson. Al was kind and generous and brilliant and approachable, and he was always sharing his time and insights and encouragement. And that meant a lot. Although my comments will only scratch the surface of Al's impact on the field of criminology, as well as the sentencing and correction policies in Pennsylvania, I'd like to highlight 3 impacts directly related to the commission's work. The first, Al was lead staff on the Task Force on Science and Technology, part of President Johnson's 1965 Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice. It was in this role that Al coined the term criminal justice system, describing a systems approach to the study of crime and its impact on society. This was a big deal. The first time a flow diagram described the movement of cases from criminal activity to law enforcement response to prosecution to courts and corrections. In fact, during a meeting of the strategic planning work group that Steve mentioned, we presented Al with a cake featuring the criminal justice flow chart to celebrate the 50th anniversary of his work. Just incredible. With 50 years later, he was still working away, engaged in some of the activities that we were doing as a commission. Attached to this flow diagram that Al had developed back in the 1960s was much more. It was the development of methods of data collection and analysis at key decision points in the system. The concrete products of that work, of that design and that matching of data collection and analysis to that design led to, supported the Sentencing Commission and other Commonwealth agencies, including PCCD, the Department of Corrections, the Parole Board, where the development of these simulation models and impact analyses and projection populations that we use to this day. And they're used to inform and guide policymakers in making decisions about legislation or budget decisions and others. So a huge impact, a very practical impact from a very theoretical start. The second point I wanted to mention, that from this work that Al did in the design of the system, the criminal justice system, his work and his background as an engineer and operations research analyst, he developed a number of theories which continue to guide sentencing policy and sentencing guidelines. He developed a theory around career criminals that really informed a narrow approach to legislation like 3 strikes, where there's a limited number of people that you really want to target instead of having broad policies that, in fact, over-incarcerate individuals that wouldn't be the right prescription as far as a sentence. He developed a theory called replacement theory that addressed drug trafficking and talking about the black market and how you take a drug trafficker off the road and that spot is filled by someone else. So you have to be careful in developing policies to recognize this replacement theory, because otherwise you keep locking people away, but you still have someone filling the void because of the black market. He had a theory around gun violence, and especially the escalation in gun violence as young offenders had access to guns, and how that created a terrible situation, and develop policies around how to deal with that type of thing. And finally, as Professor Chanenson mentioned, he had a theory called redemption theory that really talked about or studied recidivism and talked about individuals that after a long period of sustained non-offending, they're at a very low risk of offending again. And that really has informed the commission's policy around lapsing, but has developed other legislative policies in terms of how to look at criminal history and how to look at reoffending and use that in a thoughtful way about developing policy. The final thing I wanted to mention about Al was back to some of the mandates that the commission received over the years. 2008 was like a banner year. The General Assembly enacted a package of sentencing and correction reforms, and the commission received a lot of mandates at that time. Acts 81 and 83 of 2008 required the Sentencing Commission to modify the existing sentencing guidelines and to adopt new guidelines for resentencing, parole, and recommitment. And then 2 years later, Act 95 of 2010 required the commission to develop a risk assessment instrument. It may be surprising, a lot of not much funding was provided for this effort, and the commission had limited staff. But around this time, Al approached me with an offer. He said that at Carnegie Mellon, they had a graduate capstone project that they called a system synthesis project that everyone in their master's program would have to participate in. And you'd have a group of 6 or 8 or 10 students work for a full semester on a project. And they would bring data analysis to it. They'd bring policy to it. Really bright kids doing great work. You'd develop an advisory committee around it, and you'd have a faculty member staff it. So Al asked me for a 1-page proposal. He submitted it, and it was selected as one of the projects. And in 2009, we had our first system synthesis project by CMU for the commission. I believe that one might have dealt with risk assessment. It's hard to say because over the course of from then until now, we have had a number, I think 8 or 10 of these projects through Carnegie Mellon at no cost to the commission. Rigorous work by faculty and students at Carnegie Mellon, and a real way of helping to contribute to developing good policy and using the data and the information the commission had in a way of helping the commission to do its work. So just an amazing thing. And what was great about Al's approach to this was not only his engagement and his full understanding of what was going on, but also how he institutionalized the effort so that for year after year, we'd have more and more of these projects. And it wasn't just Al leading the projects. There were other faculty members like Professor Daniel Nagin and others who led similar projects for the commission. So a real way of giving back to the commission. The commission and the Commonwealth are indebted to Professor Al Bloomstein for his foundational work and his lifelong contributions to address the challenges of crime in a free society. May his memory be a blessing. Thank you very much.
Great. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and for their wonderful tributes that capture the contributions that Professor Bloomstein made to our space of criminal justice, but also about the man and the human that he was, which I think Professor Chanenson captured perfectly in terms of his kindness and gentleness. I will turn it to Professor Mystic for a few additional comments.
I, of course, knew of Al early in my political and governmental career in Pittsburgh because he was all those things that Professors Chanenson and Bergstrom have just said that he was, in terms of his intellectual curiosity and his versatility and his willingness to help. I got to know him much better in the early 90s when I was chief of staff to the mayor of Pittsburgh, and we had 2 warring drug gangs, and we were grappling with how to best deploy our police officers. We had strained resources, obviously. The early 90s were not an easy time for municipal governments. And Al came up with a system, a computerized system that would put strikes on a map, little red strikes on a map that would show you where the calls for service, public safety service, were originating. And we could focus on those areas, and we could also anticipate where we would need to be in the weeks following that. So it was at the time a little primitive, but very, very innovative. And he never, ever hesitated to step in and help where he could. Now, again, he was, he was this academic giant. but he was also the guy next door who will help you figure out why your lawnmower won't start. He was at the end of the day a Yinzer. He was a Pittsburgh guy. He was one of us.
Thanks to Steve, Mark, Professor. It's like we have the band back together here with Professor Chanenson and Director Bergstrom here, but great tribute, the professor who helped all of us so much over the years. So thanks again for joining us in the excellent tributes that everyone here offered. Matt.
So we'll move from that to talking about the commission's organizational chart. Very high level stuff here, but I turn your attention to page 15 of the commission's notebook. And this is our, this is our current organizational chart that shows the full complement of 22 FTE positions. And you'll notice 4 vacancies on that chart. We took an opportunity, given some potential reorganization, to redraft the organizational chart. So now, if we turn to page 16 in your notebook, we tried to modernize the chart just slightly, but also reorganized it. And in this reorganization, what we've done is, prior to this reorganization, the deputy director, the head of research, was also the overseeing the information and technology unit. Because of a primary focus of the applications and information technology unit is the development of CASER, which we know about right now in the 8th edition guidelines and resentencing, there's a tremendous amount of work being done by the education and outreach unit and we'll hear from Christy later about her processes for developing the work of CASER. It just made a lot more sense to shift that overseeing responsibility to under our senior deputy director, Ryan Myers. So in this draft, you'll notice now that Ryan oversees 3 of the units, which is the administrative and financial support unit, applications and information technology unit, and the education and outreach unit. But also, before we seek a motion to approve the new arrangement of the commission, I just want to take a moment and thank both Representative Krajewski and Judge Marsico for their continued support and work, and the commission members as well, as we engage with the governor's office, with the legislative members, with the courts and our other department and agencies that we work with, providing continuous support for us. I also want to thank Professor Mystic, who continues to be an invaluable resource for the commission. For example, in this last quarter alone, he helped me with several human resource issues related to Penn State and assisted in drafting an MOU that we'll hear a little bit later with faculty at Penn State University and the University of Maryland to support research through a National Institute of Justice grant. And maybe more importantly, beyond serving as legal counsel, he serves as a general advisor and a friend and a trusted partner for me in my role as the executive director. Further, I want to thank all the managers and the staff who continue to amaze me in the volume and quality of their work. I think one of the nice things about this organizational chart is the people that the commission members typically see are our managers and not the staff themselves. And this is really the people who make things happen at the commission. So when I arrived at the commission in 2018, a majority of the staff were longtime commission employees with having as many as 25 years of service to the commission. Currently, Ryan is our longest serving tenured staffer at 12 and a half years, followed by Brett Miller, our unit manager of the research and data analysis unit, at 9 years of service. Overall, the average tenure of current commission staff, the 18 FTE, is 4.5 years. So this newer cohort of staff allowed the commission to modernize many of the older processes and consistently challenge and rethink the way that we conduct our business. So, for example, the continued implementation of the 8th edition guidelines is a case study in how staff have developed new ways to share information with our stakeholders. This has come in the form of data snapshots, updated data dashboards, novel reference guides, and training materials, and the focus on developing a web-based application that highlights data quality and the user experiences. So these accomplishments will be explored in greater details by the unit managers as they report out to the commission later in this meeting. So I seek a motion for the approval of this modified organizational chart, which, as I mentioned, the main difference other than stylistic is moving the responsibilities of overseeing the applications and information technology unit to be under the senior deputy director, as well as rebranding, if you would, the deputy director to be the head of research and research partnerships, that being Noah. So again, seeking a motion for the approval of the modified staff organizational chart.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the staff organizational chart?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Judge Dally,
I'll
and I will
second.
note second, Professor Rago. And we'll also note Judge Dally. I don't know if we had him on the initial attendance roster, but note that he's present. Any discussion? All right, then we'll take a vote. All those in favor of the new staff organizational chart signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Seeing none, the organizational chart will be approved. I'll also note Senator Street is present and voting.
The tributes from our former colleagues got me off schedule, and I'd like to provide an opportunity for Secretary Harry to provide an ex officio update.
Thank you. No worries. Just a couple really quick things. We did meet with our vendor yesterday regarding our Strong R risk and needs assessment tool, and that is progressing. We were able to reach 72%. That's only after 1 year of data regarding recidivism, but hopeful that that will only improve after we continue to collect more data with the tool. And then we are moving into phase 2, which will involve our custody levels, and that hopefully will roll out in the fall. And then lastly, just wanted to thank the commission folks who reviewed the draft of the SDTP report, the State Drug Treatment Program report. And so that is a legislative requirement. We will be sharing it and finalizing it shortly. Just preliminarily sneak peek to the results look very positive. The program has saved the DOC approximately $63,959 per graduate. And we've seen an increase of 50% more compared to the previous SIP state intermediate punishment. And so it's worked out very well for us. And again, appreciate everyone's review of that before it gets finalized. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Great. And I'll just make one comment, and I really appreciate the secretary highlighting that review of the report, because that has not always been customary that we've had the opportunity. And I think it's a testament to the relationships that staff have built with members of the DOC and the trust that we have in each other about the work that both of us are doing and willingness to share. So thank you for that. All right. The next item on the agenda is commission operations. And I'm just going to highlight 3 recent developments. The first off is I've been working with the chief clerk of the House of Representatives to renew our office space here in the Irvis building. We have currently a 3-year MOU with the House for our space, and that's set to expire in August of this year. Provided the chief clerk with an updated MOU, and her office is currently reviewing that MOU, and she, at least off the record, was very favorable of our work and having us here as presence in the Irvis building and continuing to be here. So hopefully we'll have a signed MOU for our June commission meeting and put that in the rearview mirror for a little bit, at least. Second, and as you know, we continue to think a lot about our budget, and you'll hear some themes about our budget and ways that we're being creative and thinking about having cost savings, but also seeking alternative sources of funding. After talking with Professor Mystic and Representative Krajewski and others, I took the opportunity to meet with the executive director of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency to assess the feasibility of obtaining additional JRI-2 funds. Previously, the commission received $1.3 million over 4 fiscal years to, quote, implement risk assessment and justice reinvestment sentencing features. Our final appropriation or receiving of funds for that was fiscal year 24-25. Executive Director Kenyon indicated that this year's JRR funds were in excess of $20 million, which I believe was roughly a 5-fold increase. Does that sound right? From previous years. And a lot of that money, of course, is going where it's designated to the counties, but they've held back roughly $5 million to utilize for special projects. So Executive Director Kenyon was very receptive to my conversations with her about either seeking a one-time funding appropriation to the commission. And we also talked about setting this up over time. She wasn't certain if those funds will continue to be available in the future. And so she and I are going to continue having this dialogue, but she wanted me to pass along that, again, at least on face, was supportive of potential additional funding to support the development of CASER and the commission's efforts to improve data collection around resentencing and additional evaluations of JRI-2 programming. So more to come, I guess, at the June meeting. I think it would be a really amazing influx to, again, support those initiatives that I mentioned. Okay, third, on this same kind of theme, earlier I'd mentioned that there was an MOU that we entered in with faculty for an NIJ-funded project. In this case, the work that was involved in collating, collecting, and assembling the data that they requested was many weeks of staff time. So Noah later will talk about the different types of data that we provide under general release, contracted release, etc. This volume and amount of work necessitated us to enter into an agreement where they're going to be paying for our services. So while small, they are going to be providing the commission with $10,000 to cover the work of and the efforts of commission staff in assembling that. Again, this is no small effort, and thank our team for doing that. Thank Brett for leading this effort. Been a lot of meetings, again, working also with Professor Mistrick on drafting this MOU and thinking about how we're going to have this agreement. And then on the same theme, Noah, our Deputy Director of Research and Research Partnership, had applied for a fellowship through the Social Science Research Institute at Penn State University. This is out of our talk about research practice partnerships that he presented last time, and he'll expand on this a little bit more. But if he receives this, which again, we're very optimistic that he will, it will pay 20% of his salary to allow us to pursue commission initiatives that are already currently underway that we would be doing without this fellowship. So we're really excited about building that partnership with the university, but also another opportunity to offset some of our costs as we move forward. Okay, so now moving down into the fiscal operations, I'll just note that on the agenda, there's a small typo that we, under fiscal, there is nothing to report out on fiscal year 23-24 budget, thankfully. Sorry about the confusion there, possibly. So I want to move to the financial audit. And the audit can be found on starting on page 20. The commission has contracted with an independent accounting firm named Boyer and Ritter. And this audit is the third and final audit of our current contract. And our audit is an independent examination of financial statements to confirm accuracy and compliance with accounting standards. And the fiscal year 24-25 financial audit conducted by Boyer Ritter found no deficiencies in either compliance or internal controls. So I seek a motion for the acceptance of the fiscal year 24-25 financial audit.
Do we have a motion to accept the audit from Boyer and Ritter?
I so move.
All right. Second,
Second.
Judge Dowley. All right, any discussion about the audit? Praying there's none and seeing none. All right. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of accepting the financial audit signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No opposition. We will record an affirmative vote in favor of accepting the audit.
Great. So moving on now to page 39, since this was the last year of our 3-year contract with Boyer Ritter, you'll see a draft of requests for proposals or formal bids for a 3-year contract for independent financial annual audits to be conducted in fiscal years 25, 26, 26, 27, and 27, 28. Just for reference, and obviously we'll be accepting bids for this, the previous contract was for 3 years and the annual rate was roughly $9,500 per year. So we're seeking a motion to approve a request for bids for a financial audit for those 3 fiscal years.
All right. Do we have a motion to
So moved.
go ahead with the request for proposals? Senator Street?
Yeah, I move.
Second. Okay. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Professor Rago, any discussion on the request for proposal? All right, no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying nay. All right, the motion carries.
Great, thank you. So now we'll move to the current operating budget and look at our balances and then close out with a discussion about a service purchase contract. Page 17 of the notebook and 18 provides our current operating budget. And the current operating budget is roughly $3.8 million, and that includes $400,000 that we're using for this CASER project, at least in our budget, that we'll come back to. So our operating budget, and this has the assumption of the full complement of 22 FTE, is roughly $3.4 million. And we'll see shortly that these cost-saving measures that I talked about in our vacancies is actually allowing us to save some money this year, and that's because of the generous increase in our appropriation that we received from $2.553 million to just slightly over $3 million in the last fiscal year. It's worth noting, I'll hold off on that. So in page 19 are our current balances, and I'll just note 2 things. The first is the first line of the reserve account that shows the reserves at roughly $250,000. Because of our budgetary challenges, that amount has been reduced from what was previously $750,000 down to this value of $250,000. And those monies are really important for the commission during the budgetary impasse, which hopefully won't occur again, but if it does, the commission expenses are roughly $200,000 a month. So we previously had about a 3.5-month cushion. And if you remember, the impasse went longer and we had to have arrangements with Penn State to assist us in the last impasse. So we're making every effort we can in the short run to do these cost savings. And I believe at the end of this fiscal year, we'll have roughly $200,000 to $250,000 that we could put back into our reserves to increase it to $450,000 to $500,000. And we'll be seeking opportunities in the future to continue to make that whole back to the $750,000 amount. I will note, and Christy Bundro will cover this, that we are hoping to fill one of the vacancies, which will reduce this opportunity slightly to save money in the future. And that's for the Information Technology and Applications Unit to support the development of CASER. The second line, on that same theme, is to highlight the money that we still have left in JRI 2. So as I mentioned, the legislation called for the commission to receive $400,000 for 4 separate years. One of the years, because of COVID, we received less due to fewer savings. So we received about $1.3 million rather than $1.6 million. we've earmarked that primarily to focus on the development of CASER. And we know the history of working with different vendors in that space and have really targeted those funding to be utilized with consultants now that Christie's engaging with to help in the development of CASER. So we still have considerable money left there. Hopefully we'll receive additional JRI2 money that we can then put back into that bucket to continue to support our work in developing that application. But now seeking a final motion here to approve a service purchase contract, which can be found on page 40 and 41 in your materials. So seeking a motion to approve a service purchase contract with Carbon Creek, not to exceed $100,000 to provide application development services for the next gen CASER application.
And this is just a continuation of the prior service
Correct.
contracts. All right. Do we have a motion to approve the service purchase contract with Carbon Creek?
I'll make that motion. Second.
Judge Taylor Smith moves, Judge Dally seconds. Any discussion on the service purchase contract? All right. Call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? All right. The service purchase contract shall be approved.
Great. And then one last piece about the fiscal year 26-27. I'm really happy to report that the governor's budget for fiscal year 26-27 preserved the commission's increased appropriation that we saw in fiscal year 25-26 of, it's a hard number to say, $3.0553 million, an increase of $500,000. So again, talking with Representative Krajewski and other legislative members, thought best if I actually wait this year a little bit to submit our budget requests. Traditionally, right at the beginning of the year before the governor's budget, we've submitted. This way we can just stay on the radar maybe as this process moves forward in June. So in the next few weeks, I'll be submitting our request, as I mentioned, which will be operating expenses of $3.4 million, with a great thanks for their previous increase in our last appropriation. So with that, I'll turn. Senator Street, please.
Senator Street.
Did I freeze up?
You're back. Yeah, you did freeze. Now you're good. Go ahead.
Who did you submit it to? Who do you submit it to? You submit it.
We submit it to all the leaders of both the Senate and the House, Appropriations, Judiciary, and then the leadership, of course, of the Senate and the House.
All right. I mean, when you submit it to the Senate leadership, if you could CC the Senate members on that correspondence so we can follow up on it, it would be helpful.
Great, thank you. And I should have noted that we do CC, of course, the chair and the vice chair and all legislative members of the commission.
Yeah, and again, kudos to the legislative members last year, both senators, both House members, for getting us to the point that we are. Without the four of them working as hard in conjunction with Matt and all his efforts, really a great success in a difficult budget year. So again, thanks to the two senators and the two reps for the great work they did.
Okay, that's the end of my executive report. I will turn it over now to Senior Deputy Director Myers.
Thank you, Matt. I will provide a short update, and then I'll be asking Bobby and Christy to come down and join to provide their updates on education and outreach and the applications and information technology. You'll hear from me again later at the end of the meeting, so I'll keep it, as I like to say, brief right now. The two main items that I wanted to talk about in terms of ongoing projects, one is what we refer to every year as our annual reporting and verification process. This is a vital project that staff undertake each year to support many of the mandates of the commission. And I just thought I'd take a moment to go through briefly the process that we do and who's engaged in it. And I'll start by saying that from a commission staff perspective, This is a all hands on deck, if you will. Every unit within the agency participates in this at varying times to ultimately complete the project. And so typically we start in February, and Brett and he can talk a little bit more about some of the things that they do, but just as a high level overview, in February we do some initial data and analysis, and that's a review of information from AOPC compared to SGS Web, and Brett and his unit, in conjunction with Bobby and his unit in education and outreach, just take a look at what the information is that we have in SGS Web. We always target the 1st of April to communicate that information to our Court of Common Pleas, to let them know what our preliminary reporting percentage is for the county. And we also provide them a list of cases that we have deemed to be unreported to the commission. And what we do then between April and the end of April is Bobby and his unit work closely with counties to fulfill any unreported sentences to the commission. And then in May, we do the final data analysis for what ultimately becomes our annual report, right? But that data set is the annual data set, and that, Brett can talk more about the use of that information, but that's a major part of the work that the commission does. And without all of these efforts, one, we couldn't do the annual report, but we wouldn't be able to make the information available publicly for all sorts of data requests through our dashboards and so forth. And just something to put on our calendars and maybe look forward to, but hopefully during the June commission meeting, as in years past, we will report out on the final reporting percentages by county and by state. And then we'll look forward to the fall to finalize what would become then the 2025 annual report. So before I move on to the educational partnerships in terms of some instruction that staff do, I just wanted to remind you that as I'm talking about the 2025 annual data set, we are finalizing, and you've heard me say this now for maybe 2 meetings, but we are actually finalizing the 2024 annual report. This is sort of getting us caught back up to some delays in annual reports over previous years. And Matt and I will say that it's just us tinkering with the formatting of it at the end. So substantively, this information is complete. The data is complete. Brett can talk a little bit more. I keep pointing to Brett, but it's his space, so he can talk more about what data is available. I'll just note that the 2024 data has been publicly available on the commission's website. So this is more of just us compiling everything into a physical copy. So when we get back for the June meeting, hopefully we'll have physical copies to hand out to commission members, but I anticipate before the end of this month, we will have the virtual document available online. And so I just wanted to remind you, this is what it looks like, and you'll actually be able to see it on the commission's website here in the near future. And my final comments for now are the educational partnerships. As a reminder, through our MOU with Penn State, staff instruct one course, both in the fall and the spring. So we're in the middle of the spring semester right now, next week, spring break, believe it or not. And so staff are completing what will be the spring semester course on sentencing of all things, as usual. And then you heard Professor Chanenson talk about it during his comments regarding Professor Bloomstein. I just wanted to provide some extra detail. We are right in the middle of the Villanova sentencing workshop. We completed the first session last month. We are prepping for the second and final session of this year's workshop, which takes place at the end of this month. And so I'll report out on that in the June meeting a little fuller. But what I wanted to note, and I don't recall if the professor mentioned it, but this year is the 24th year of the Villanova sentencing workshop. So we're also thinking forward to the 25th year next year and commemorating that this has been a long-standing and well-regarded collaboration between the commission, AOPC, and Villanova. So with that being said, I'm going to get out of the way and ask Bobby to provide an education and outreach update, and then we'll turn it to Christy and we'll keep moving forward. Thank you.
All right. It's still morning, so good morning. Good to see you all. Hope your year's been off to a good start. Just to give you some general overview of the Education and Outreach Unit, I'm going to cover some of the technical assistance and outreach efforts that we've taken so far. I'm going to then transition over to our compendium project. I've talked about this a couple times, but now is a really nice time to highlight where we're at with that project. As reflected on the slide, the unit continues to span several areas, including educational programming, technical assistance, SGS web support, newsletters. We had our Education and Outreach Committee meeting last month, and I'll talk about some of the outreach related to the reporting of resentences as well. And I'll round out my time with you all, talking about the compendium project. So as we look at the 8th edition sentencing guidelines, we are moving farther and farther away from the effective date, and we're entering what I kind of term as the institutionalization phase of the 8th edition, where we're looking more, a little less at the introduction of the concepts of the 8th edition and more on the uniform application across the Commonwealth. This includes our continuing efforts related to the promotion of clarity and consistency in the application and how the guidelines are interpreted and applied, maintaining that reporting integrity that we have, and supporting structured communications with practitioners who rely on us for some guidance. This year, related to that, I think we have 56 seminars scheduled throughout the year on various topics of the guidelines throughout the months. Much of our work now involves responding to more nuanced questions related to how guideline provisions interact with statutory requirements, enhancements, reporting practices, and related policies. Overall, during this phase, we're focusing on the support of consistent and accurate application of the guidelines statewide, as more and more of these cases are within the common pleas court systems. As we look at technical assistance, for our January and February, we've had 126 practitioner inquiries. So our volume is pretty consistent as we're receiving those questions from across the Commonwealth. These inquiries generally are coming from judges, prosecutors, defense counsel, probation staff, and other practitioners who are seeking clarification on guidelines application, reporting requirements, and statutory intersections. During that same time, we've approved 22 SGS web role requests, which ensures that practitioners maintain access to our commission systems. We also received 3 inmate requests and 3 right-to-know requests that we've processed following our standard features. While the volume of questions are remaining steady, the nature of questions continue to evolve, with many involving more detailed and nuance versus the introductory types of questions we had in previous years. All right. Turning my attention to our efforts related to resentencing, staff conducted 45 discussions with counties over the last several months, and we also held 5 follow-up meetings with counties to explore more specific workflow questions and reporting approaches in more detail. These discussions have provided helpful insight into how the different jurisdictions handle resentencing events within their local procedures. Moving forward, our next steps are to develop a best practices document, maintaining communication with chief probation officers, and more importantly, reviewing the reporting of 2025 resentences just to get a better understanding of the statewide reporting patterns. The goal of our work here is to support greater completeness and consistency in resentencing reporting, which is important both for policy analysis and data integrity. I'm now going to turn my attention to the compendium. This has been a labor of love for the members of my unit, but just some historical context I think that's helpful is that as the commission in previous editions of guidelines adopted new guideline editions, often accompanying material was in the form of an implementation manual. With the 8th edition, the commission took a more structured approach to the development of the guidelines and also slightly pivoted in how we were providing support to our practitioners. And what we have with this edition of guidelines is a multi-volume reference system. The compendium organizes materials across several related areas of the commission work. And volume 1, which is recently completed, is focusing on the 8th edition sentencing guidelines. Additional volumes will address areas such as resentencing guidelines, sentence risk assessment instrument, state parole guidelines, and state parole recommitment ranges. As we look at our first volume, again, related to the 8th edition sentencing guidelines, we've organized the materials into a series of topic-specific handbooks. These handbooks address enhancements, judicial proceeding considerations, mandatory sentencing provisions, offense gravity scores, as noted on the screen. I think it's helpful just to give you a orientation of how you get to this awesome reference material. So first, I'm sure your bookmark on all of your computers is the PCS website. On the web page, you navigate to the top banner. On the near the right-hand side is Education and Outreach. And at the bottom, you'll notice, if you haven't already, a new area of Guidelines Compendium. We also have references that are embedded into the Guidelines and Statutes tab as well, just to get there in more ways. But once you navigate to the Guidelines Compendium tab, the bottom right screen is a screenshot of the landing page for what the compendium is, and a nice brief overview for those that might be unfamiliar with what is this compendium that you speak of. And so that will get you to where we have all of this information housed for users. So as we look at the structure of the web page, I think it's helpful just to get everyone oriented to what our approach was for the website. Again, we have our first volume published. That's been out there for a couple weeks now. Each of those tiles are the clickable handbook that would contain the information respective within that aspect of the volume. The length of those documents is going to vary depending on the scope of the topic, but each follows a very similar general format and organization just to help practitioners navigate through the information. You'll also notice at the bottom of the screen are some supplements that we feel are helpful to users, which provide additional resources related to the guidelines. While these materials are designed primarily as digital documents, we do recognize that some practitioners prefer paper, so there is the mechanism to be able to print those off and create a paper-oriented reference document. However, I will caution that one of the approaches that we deployed with our compendium was utilization of hyperlinks, so that functionality would obviously not work on the paper version, but nonetheless, the structural documents will be maintained if someone wishes to have a paper version. So what I wanted to do is just at a really high level, talk through the orientation of the document, as this may be new to those that are watching today. As we look at the structural orientation of materials, each handbook is following a consistent format that includes the cover page, organized sections addressing specific policy areas, references to relevant statute provisions, and guideline sections. It's important to maintain that consistent structure across the handbooks to ensure that practitioners can quickly locate and understand how different policy areas are relating to one another. As we look at the depth of the content provided, rather than reproducing the guideline text, the materials also provide contextual explanations and interpretation to help clarify how the policies are operating in practice. This approach allows the Commission to preserve the underlying policy intent while providing practitioners with a practical guidance when working through complex sentencing scenarios. The materials also incorporate functional design approaches. These include the use, again, as I mentioned, hyperlinks and cross-references, which allow users to navigate efficiently between related sections within the document. For example, practitioners can review particular guideline topics and access related statutory provisions and other relevant sections within the compendium and other resources that we feel would be helpful to illustrate what they're researching. This design helps improve usability and support practitioners who rely on these materials during real-world case analyses. Ultimately, the goal of the compendium is to support several key objectives for the Commission. First, it promotes the uniform application of the guidelines across the Commonwealth. Second, it helps reduce interpretive ambiguity by providing structured context and clarification. Third, it supports automation and training efforts, particularly as systems of reporting tools continue to evolve. Fourth, it helps preserve institutional knowledge and policy history within a structured reference framework, which, as we talked about earlier with Matt and our years of service, I think it's really important to maintain that information for individuals. And finally, it helps align policy interpretation, reporting practices, and education efforts in a consistent system of guidance. In many ways, the eighth edition established the policy reforms, and the compendium helps us ensure those reforms are clearly understood and sustainably applied over time. That is my overview. Any questions? Happy to answer about compendium or otherwise. Otherwise, I will.
Let me just add one quick comment, and beyond thanking Bobby and his team for developing an amazing resource. As we conceptualize our MOUs with our partners, one of them is with Penn State, and I just want to highlight that we have a really remarkable website, and a lot of it is we rely on liberal arts information technology. They support us, so we tell them we need a click box, a circle, and we work with them, and you'll see it from the compendium to the dashboards. Not the content itself, of course, but the physical infrastructure of the website. So it's just important to highlight that that's a really valuable resource, that we don't have a web developer per se in-house. Christie's team could do it, but they have a lot on their plate. So we benefit greatly from the work of Penn State University in this situation.
Thank you.
Let me move this closer because I know you guys can never hear me. Right. All right. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. Afternoon, yep. Good. I'm going to start with a quick update on staffing before I move on to the CASER project and other topics. So Matt mentioned earlier, we are recruiting for the software engineer position that's been vacant since last April. This role is critical to sustaining both our legacy SGS web system as well as supporting the ongoing development of the CASER application. The job posting can be found on the Penn State job site if you know someone who might be interested, or you can just reach out to me directly for more information. So the project team continues to make steady progress on the development of CASER, which will eventually replace the legacy SGS web application. The project remains on track based on the revised timeline that I presented back in the December meeting. We are nearing the end of the core application development and testing efforts, and the education and outreach unit has begun preparing for the significant effort of training users across all 67 counties on the new application. We've also started planning for the deployment of the application. So we're going to pilot the application with a small group of counties to identify and resolve any issues before the statewide rollout. We have begun discussing which counties those would be, which ones would make a good pilot based on criteria such as caseload, number of users, the county's previous compliance with submitting information into SGS Web, as well as our relationship with users in the county, such as judges on this commission. Pilot testing is scheduled to begin in the fourth quarter of this year. And then if all goes well with that, the rollout would begin early next year. With respect to where we are specifically in the development of the application, since the December meeting, we've been primarily focused on implementing the functionality to generate resentencing guidelines. We're actually finishing that up in the next week, and we'll begin testing it. And we've also been revamping our initial implementation of inchoate offenses and offenses with classifications tied to underlying offenses. That's hard to say, such as ethnic intimidation and unlawful contact with a minor, just to create a more accurate and robust approach. We didn't have that quite right when we first did it. Following this phase, the remaining go live development scope includes resentence submission, data integration, and then preparations of the production system. So getting close. The next few slides are just some of the work we recently completed for the resentencing guidelines generation functionality. So this is just a page where the user can say whether the probation is being revoked because of a conviction violation or a technical violation. If it's a conviction violation, that actually increases the OGS, and so that changes what the guidelines are. So they would say if it's conviction or technical, we apply that adjustment, and then on the next page is where we present those guidelines, and then they can print the resentencing guideline form from here, which will look a lot like the guideline form. The main difference is it'll say what the reason for the probation revocation was, and then we'll also have a little section that just shows the previous sentences for this offense that have been recorded in the case or application. All right, so as part of my update today, I thought I would also give you a little insight into our software development process that we've been following. Hopefully I won't bore you too much, but so for any feature or function in the application that we work on, we start with gathering all the requirements for it. So for example, when a sentence is submitted, the application checks to see if the sentence conforms to the guidelines, and then also verifies that the sentence is in accordance with statute. So when we're gathering requirements for a sentence submission feature, we look at all the rules that are defined in the guidelines to determine conformity. We look at what's defined in statute for whether like a mandatory minimum applies and what the maximum sentence can be. And then we also identify any special rules that might need to be considered, like how to handle secondary subsequent drug offenses that, increase the maximum sentence, or, an enhancement that has applied that increases the OGS, so the guideline range needs to be adjusted. We also actively incorporate input from our stakeholders. So at the outset of the CASER project, we actually met with users from multiple counties, as well as former users within our education and outreach unit to understand how they use SGS Web, what they struggle with when they're using it, and we took their suggestions for improvement as well. So that feedback has directly informed how we've designed and built CASER with the goal of improving both functionality and usability. So technically, this slide should probably include one more olive in that martini glass or the funnel labeled SGS Web, since we do regularly review how features were implemented in the legacy system and make deliberate decisions whether to replicate it if it was working well, or if it wasn't working well, how we could improve it in CASER. Once we've gathered the requirements, that's when we start the design process. So we create mock-ups of what the user will see and what the application page will look like and how that'll process. We also create detailed documents that explain how the functionality work. Like, what does the application do if a sentence does not conform to the guidelines? What does it do if it does not meet the mandatory minimum? What does it do if it exceeds the maximum sentence allowed by statute? So this type of documentation is referred to as user acceptance criteria, because it clearly defines how the application must function in order to meet user expectations and be considered ready to use. And then before we actually start building it, we do review that documentation with our stakeholder representatives. So this typically includes reviewing it with our education outreach unit, since many of those people previously worked in counties using SGS Web, and then as well as with the other unit managers and members of our executive team. Depending on the feature process we're designing, we may also consult additional subject matter experts. For example, when we were designing the guideline form, we reviewed the proposed design with several judges, including Judge Marsico and Judge Daly. And then based on that feedback we receive, we go in, we refine the requirements, and we revise the design to reflect any new insights or any other information that we've received before we actually start coding. Once we've have a final or somewhat final design, we do move into the build phase. So at that point, we begin writing the code, configuring the database structures, and setting up any necessary infrastructure. We also established business rules, validations, and integrations required to support the functionality. So in other words, this is where the design actually becomes a working application, translating the documented requirements into a fully functioning feature within the system. And then once we build it, we have to test it. So this is where we do quality assurance testing. We go through, we verify the application meets all the documented requirements and that it aligns with the defined user acceptance criteria and functions as intended. We identify any defects, inconsistencies, or edge cases. And then if there are any issues, it's sent back to our development team for correction. And then once they correct it, we test it again. So that's why there's a little circle there. Once the module is fully built and ready for review, we then partner with Education Outreach to conduct user acceptance testing. So during this phase, we actually walk through real-world cases. We actually take cases from our production system and replicate them in our case or test environment just to compare like how it's acting in SGS Web versus how it's acting in Caser. Any issues we uncover, whether they're technical problems or usability concerns, are documented, reviewed, and addressed. And then based on the feedback we receive, we might, again, maybe we got the requirements wrong, and so we have to adjust that, or we might have to adjust the design. And then those improvements are then incorporated into our next development cycle. And once the whole application is ready to use, that's when we'll get the pilot counties involved, and they'll essentially be performing our final round of testing, which could also lead to some changes. So this is the process we follow for every feature, essentially, that we develop in the application. I do want to emphasize that we've been intentionally gathering user and stakeholder feedback throughout the process, just so rather than waiting until the whole application is done, because it helps us catch issues earlier, it helps improve usability, and it helps ensure that the final product will meet our needs. And so that is our development process in a nutshell.
Hey, Christy, may I just add one comment? Sorry, I'm over here.
Absolutely.
I'm hiding.
Where are you?
A unique setup that we have at the commission, and I think we're fortunate from a staff perspective, and Christy had mentioned this. I just wanted to add on a little bit. The folks in Bobby's unit in education and outreach have decades worth of experience in the county as former probation and parole officers, mainly, and from counties that the probation department was the sole office responsible for generating sentencing guidelines for the court's consideration, as well as submitting the sentencing information to the commission. So as Christy talks about this, user acceptance and internal testing, yes, it's being done by staff at the commission, but we're fortunate because it's being done by staff at the commission who used to do it at the county level. And so there's that opportunity for them to appreciate what we're trying to achieve from a commission perspective and the needs that we want in terms of data collection for research projects and so forth, but also from the nuance of having done the job at the county level. And so I just wanted to add that to what Christy had mentioned, because I think that brings a little extra to our internal review that maybe if we weren't set up that way, we would have to look to counties earlier in this process to provide some of that initial feedback. But I've said too much, but I just wanted to add that and thank Christy.
All right. Well, one more last thing, and this is more historical. We're really fortunate now to have brought this IT development in-house. When I started at the commission, we had one person and we contracted everything externally, and we're at their mercy in terms of quality, timelines, and now having a dedicated team in-house has been really, you can see how professional that operation is, what the product looks like, and how deliberative they are in the development of this. So we're really appreciative that we've moved in that direction and we have that internal capacity. And Christy, as I mentioned, is working on hiring an additional person to join her team, and then the work of those consultants as well. So thank you.
Thank you both. All right. I'll wrap it up real quick. Just a quick update on SGS Web. We did deploy some updates to SGS Web on February 11th to correct a few issues related to ethnic intimidation, terrorism, and eco-terrorism offenses where we weren't showing the right enhancements that could be available. We also fixed some minor formatting issues on the 8th edition sentencing guidelines form. In addition, we assisted education and outreach with configuring the new DUI following diversion offenses, and we are also currently working with the Bureau of Enterprise Shared Technology Services to migrate the SGS Web databases to SQL Server 2022. And then as far as usage of SGS Web, as of January 31st, we've had over 115,000 sentences with 2025 sentencing dates have been submitted. So that is all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any, or I might throw it to Matt and Ryan to answer. Okay.
Questions? Okay. Thanks, Christy. Very good. I believe it's almost there, 2027.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with some updates on our research partnerships, and I'm going to start with our research partnership with Penn State, for whom we have a memorandum of understanding. And a major part of that memorandum of understanding is work with Penn State's Criminal Justice Research Center, CJRC. And one component of that is our work with our postdoctoral scholars. And our postdoctoral scholars help with a variety of commission-mandated work and also pursue independent research that often complements the commission's work. And Nicholas Goldrosen, our current postdoctoral scholar, is working on dissemination efforts on SR 196, a veteran study, comprehensive study of veterans involved in the criminal justice system. And this includes a manuscript which uses Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing data linked with information on veteran status to examine differences in offending patterns between veterans and non-veterans. That's one effort that Nicholas is working on. Another effort that he is working on is studying probation practices in Allegheny County. And this is through an emerging research practice partnership we have with Allegheny County, where we help them identify various issues that are important to them and study those various initiatives and give them feedback. Nick will be taking a position at Rutgers next semester, a top criminal justice program in the United States. This is mostly because of his talent, but I also think that PCS can take some credit too. And this process of having Nick involved is going to provide us feedback loops because he will continue working on projects relevant to Pennsylvania and to the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing and provide us useful information to improve our practices. And we are currently interviewing several individuals for up to 2 postdoctoral positions who will collaborate with the commission on a variety of initiatives next year. Also, one of the things we're trying to do in the research unit is that evaluations of criminal justice policies are often limited to recidivism. To try to broaden the outcomes that we look at, we are doing 2 things. We're looking at exploring health outcomes and also looking at improving our cost-benefit analyses. And as part of that, we are exploring engagement with Dr. Brady Horn, a professor of economics at the University of New Mexico, whose research focuses on the intersection of substance use disorders, economics, and crime. He is also a member of the New Mexico Sentencing Commission. And a major part of his work is economic analysis and providing cost-benefit analysis related to the cost of specific forms of recidivism. So we're in these initial discussions, and we'll provide an update at the next commission meeting, whether Brady is able to join us as a visiting scholar. We are also in initial discussion with the Criminal Justice Research Center to host a sentencing symposium, possibly in the fall of 2027. One idea we are exploring is a conference that takes stock of major developments in sentencing research over the past few decades, and then involves different cohorts of attendees, including academics, directors of sentencing commissions, and practitioners throughout the country. This is in the spirit of research practice partnerships, which can provide more useful information to practitioners. And last, we continue to work with Carnegie Mellon on system synthesis projects. So earlier at the beginning of the session, we talked about how Al Bloomstein institutionalized the a system synthesis project at Carnegie Mellon. Those partnerships that Al helped create continue. And as part of this, we are exploring issues related to pretrial decision making. And this is a good opportunity for the commission as it's no cost and it allows us to leverage expertise at the local university. And we worked with the Carnegie Mellon team last semester on some initial work on pretrial decision making, and we're continuing that work. And as part of that work this semester, they're looking at a model to predict recidivism and failure to appear and incorporating that model into a decision support tool that could possibly be used down the line by magisterial district court judges regarding pretrial decision making.
I'll just add one other, what I think has been a really nice development this year for the first time is adding some law students from Duquesne University as well to the project. From a substantive side, as I mentioned maybe previously, the folks at Carnegie Mellon are technical folks, not criminal justice folks. They have no idea about the landscape, quickly figure it out, and then do some of the work that Christy mentioned of programming and different things. So that's been a really valuable addition, but a great synergy of institutions in the commission.
I can simply add that my law students who've been assigned to this project last semester and again this semester are getting as much as they're giving. It's the perfect, really the perfect arrangement, and we're grateful for the opportunity to participate.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing, which part of to fill in the gap for especially the Carnegie Mellon students, we have been reaching out to magisterial district court judges and recently spoke with a former chair of the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, Judge Todd Stevens, and he was very generous to give us an hour of his time to talk to us about how he thinks about bail decisions and a setting of bail and so forth. So really appreciate his time, but that sort of connection to the Commonwealth and practitioners obviously is the value that we provide as feedback to the students in their educational process as well.
Thank you, Matt. The last update is that one of our mandates is to serve as a clearinghouse and information center for the collection, preparation, and dissemination of information in the Commonwealth on sentencing, resentencing, and parole practices. Brett leads those initiatives, and we have several different forms of data that we release. We have general release data and contracted release data. And the main difference between the general and contracted release data is that the contracted release data includes text fields for describing reasons for departures, and they also contain an individual state identification number. There's different processes for applying for each of those types of data. More recently, we've had an increased interest in researchers in combining data sets. So for instance, using commission data combined with DOC data or commission data combined with AOPC data. And this relates to Matt's earlier discussion of the MOU with the researchers from Penn State and Maryland, because we are engaging with these researchers to support their study that is funded by an NIJ grant. And because these external data sources are not all, we don't own them, we are working with counsel to put up extra guardrails to protect us, including developing memorandums of understanding that we can use for these projects. I also think that these projects, we should note, hold some benefit, a lot of benefit for the for Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, as these systems are interrelated, and we also often learn a lot more about best practices by connecting these data and analyzing them together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll close this out with the unit updates here, and I'll try to keep it semi-brief here. So I spent most of my time in the last two commission meetings talking about two major reports we were working on for the state legislature. So one of them was short sentence parole, an evaluation of the program at DOC. And then the other was an evaluation and a validation of our own risk assessment instrument. So we had finished the analysis of both of those at the December commission meeting, but hadn't quite wrapped up the reports and submitted those yet. So shortly after the December meeting, we submitted both of those reports to the General Assembly. And along with the SR 196 Veterans Report, that made three major reports to the General Assembly in 2025. So a major lift for our unit. It took a lot of collaboration from everybody, but we're very proud to get those 3 reports submitted last year. Just recently, we finished up and posted the 2024 annual data to the Commission's website. So that includes all of the data tables that will go into the annual report when that gets published, as well as making some fairly substantial changes to our data dashboards that we provide on the website. And I'll go through those in a little more detail at the end here. But I think the real significance of releasing this 2024 data is this is the first time we're releasing data on the 8th edition sentencing guidelines to the public. So like I said, I'll walk through the dashboards a little bit in a minute here and kind of give you an idea of why that necessitated some changes to our annual report, and then also why we made some updates to our dashboards to accommodate that new data. We continue to work closely with the parole board in providing annual and quarterly reports to board members, including annual individual decision maker reports that we provide to all the board members and to about 25 hearing examiners each year. So just earlier this week, we submitted the 4th quarter of 2025 report to the board, and we also submitted individual reports. I believe about 35 individual reports for all decisions made in 2025. So just shortly to encapsulate all of this, I mentioned how in 2025 we submitted the 3 major reports, and with our relatively small staff, that was a pretty big lift for us. So as part of that, a lot of staff members maybe got stuck into certain areas of work where they were kind of doing repetitive work for the entire year. What we're trying to do now that we're past some of those mandated projects is give staff an opportunity to sort of branch out, work on some different areas, and kind of round out their own skill sets. We've been branching out and looking into the pretrial space pretty heavily, looking at bail decisions, especially that initial decision to hold or to deny bail, and then looking at analyses of how do bail practices differ across counties. What's the dollar amounts look like? Which counties are using unsecured bond versus monetary? So we've been doing a lot of work in that area and kind of divvying up our projects in different ways to give staff an opportunity to just create redundancies and a little more flexibility across the staff. All right, and I'll just walk you quickly through some of our updated data dashboards. So we try to make these as easy to find as possible. So right from our homepage, we've got a button right there that takes you straight to the dashboards. And then once you click on it, it takes you to a landing page where you get to pick from several different dashboards. So in the past, we only had basically one edition of guidelines, the 7th edition, and we had, I think, 4 different dashboards that looked at sentence lengths, sentence conformity, general information across the state. Now that we've added the 2024 data, we had some challenges where now with the 8th edition guidelines, conformity has a different meaning than it did before. We've added in dispositional departures. We've changed the standard ranges. So there's some definitional differences there. We also have a whole new scale for OGS. We've got different values for prior record score. It just sort of necessitated us to be able to separate those 2 different versions of guidelines and create different reporting tools for each of them. So the top 2 panels there, we actually combined the 2 versions of guidelines to give information on just general caseloads, the frequency of sentences to different sentencing alternatives. And then the 2 pairs of panels below that are focused in more detail on the guidelines themselves. So the 7th edition, and then followed by the 8th edition. One of the things we're really proud of about these dashboards is just, we feel that they're very functional and easy to use in comparison to some dashboards that we've seen maybe from other agencies or other sentencing commissions. So we put in a lot of time trying to polish these up. There's limitations to the software itself, but within that software, think we've made the data really useful. What I'm showing here is an example of a sentencing outcome report from 2024. So this shows all different offense types, and then kind of gives you an idea of the number of sentences and where they're going in terms of sentencing alternative, and then a detailed breakdown by each offense type of how long those sentences are. And then along the left-hand side, we've got a whole series of different selection filters that you can use, where if you wanted to, you can drill all the way down into a specific offense, specific subsections, and even look at reports by individual judges. And so we create this report for both 7th edition and 8th edition. Another one of our commonly used tools is the sentencing conformity report. In fact, we get a lot of calls from attorneys around the state, from judges that say they use these dashboards to help them out when they have a specific case type. But similarly, on conformity, you can drill down. Here I've drilled down into simple assault. Under the 7th edition, I have OGS. I picked OGS 1, prior record score 0. And you can see there are about 100 cases in 2024. And we can see that 93% of those were within the standard guideline range. And now I'll show kind of the same example under the 8th edition. As we know, there were fewer 8th edition sentences in 2024. So this is the same offense, simple assault, only 41 cases this time around for the 8th edition. And here I've selected OGS 5, which is the lowest OGS for simple assault in the 8th edition guidelines, prior record score 0. And here you can see where we've changed the definitions of conformity for the 8th edition guidelines. So now we have, with our narrower ranges, we have 56% in the standard range, with a relatively high number in the mitigated range. So all in all, about 80% within the guidelines. But now we have these extra categories in the 8th edition where we can look at durational departures below and above, and then dispositional departures, especially below and above. So in this case, simple assault, we see 10% dispositional below and 10% above. It's just an example of how these sentences between the 7th and 8th edition are probably pretty similar, but just with the changes in definition to conformity, we do have some interesting insights that we can kind of dig into with these dashboards. And there's one other note, like I said, it's the first year of the 8th edition guidelines, so there were fewer cases. I think in 2024, we had something like 65,000 7th edition cases and less than 20,000 8th edition cases. So I will say that the data for the 8th edition is probably not really representative yet of a full year, but it is fun to be able to put this data out there kind of for the first time for the public to see. But with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
You differentiate between which edition it is with conformity. It's not all grouped together. It's like the two slides you just showed.
Yep. So just on that, when you click into the dashboards on the website, there's this landing page. So we tried to make this as clear as we could, but at the top, those dashboards are combined. It includes 8th edition and 7th edition and everything prior to that.
Okay.
And then 7th and 8th have their own categories here.
Gotcha.
I'll just add two things. One, and again, this was a huge effort by Brett and his team and accommodating the new format and thinking about how we were going to have separate dashboards. We alluded to the annual report, even that, how do we deal with two sets of guideline editions for the same tables? And so we've been wrestling with the way to make this really digestible and easy. And as Brett mentioned, and I think it's worth highlighting, this is a tool used, of course, internally by staff. But also legislative members, when thinking about impact analyses, are using this. Media is using this. Judges, as Brett mentioned, are using this. So it's a really robust tool, and you could see the high quality of the representation of the information here. And then I'll just make two quick references. Brett mentioned the parole board reports, and in our supplemental materials on page 24 is just an example of our quarter 3 report. Brett just sent the quarter 4 report. I don't know, the last few days. I don't know if it was this week or last Friday, whatever it was. So it's not in the workbook, but gives you a flavor of that information. And we've been really working closely with the parole board on how they can use this as a diagnostic tool to talk about differences in decisions between members, but also the factors that are driving those decisions, with a really intense focus on different factors as they relate to grant rates for violent and nonviolent offenses. And then lastly, and then we'll turn it to Ryan to close things up. Unless you have, okay. Just want to note the MOU we've talked about a couple times is in the supplemental materials on pages 21 to 23. And you'll see it's quite lengthy, trying to ensure, as Noah mentioned, that these guardrails are set up, that data is used for the intended purposes and only those purposes, and defining specifically that these projects, they can't use, be under the guise of the commission, that the work that they're producing is not the commission's work or any other agency or department, and that whatever the products they produce, and they can't misrepresent that when they're disseminating findings or reaching out to counties to be pilots for other parts of their projects. So again, we spent a lot of time, and thanks to Brad and others for working on that MOU, but just highlighting that also is in our supplemental materials.
Okay. I am back. I have two areas that I wanted to touch base on, and the information in terms of the policy updates can be found in your supplemental. Let me find pages 33 through 49. But I don't anticipate going into any great detail. Certainly members could ask some questions, we could have some discussions, but I just wanted to at least make us aware of a couple of things. And first is the legislative tracking. As you've heard in past meetings, I've discussed this, and this is an ongoing effort by staff at the commission to follow along with what the General Assembly is doing. Documents we make available at every quarterly meeting, and we also update information on our website for practitioners accessing the guidelines. So we've labeled this, and it's in the materials, as new offenses, and this is specifically focused on new offenses since the 8th edition's been adopted. And so, of course, that means that at some point we'd have to modify the offense listing and publish and go through the public policy process. But we at least make this information available on the website so that practitioners, when they hear of a new offense, they could go to our website, find the bill, find the act, and also find what would be the omnibus offense gravity score for that information. And so we try to be helpful, but we're clear that it's not officially published information that the commission has adopted and approved in the past, like with the 8th edition. And also along with those modifications or new offenses from the General Assembly, staff in both the Education Outreach Unit and the Application Information Unit have to update SGS Web. And we've heard a lot about the work in CASER and for the future. But as Christy had mentioned, they're constantly monitoring and maintaining SGS Web. And so anytime there is a new offense, and if the omnibus policy would apply, while we can't update the offense listing because that's a published document in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, we do have to be responsive to the courts and to practitioners and update SGS Web. And so that's, staff in both those units do a wonderful job in making sure that we have real-time changes to our real-time application in SGS Web. The second sub-bullet there under legislative tracking, and you can find that information in your supplemental, as I noted, is a recent act, the end of last year, Act 58. And I don't know the phrasing to use, but I guess it fixed or remedied the issues with not considering a prior ARD for DUI as a prior conviction. I don't intend to walk us through this act in any detail, I think we're probably familiar with it, and if not, we can certainly set aside the next 3 hours of this afternoon to talk about it. But really, the takeaway that I wanted to impress upon the commission is that we're aware of it, and we worked over the holiday timeframe and the new year to make sure that those individuals that stayed out too late, after the holidays or on New Year's Eve that ended up with the new DUI under the subsection, that they'll have the ability to select that information in SGS Web. And so we have updated it. Much like anything with DUI law, this was a lot of offenses in SGS Web and in our offense listing. But I think we've captured it. We spent a good deal of time reviewing it. I know we've talked to prosecutors and defense attorneys also to get their take on what was happening in the counties and their anticipation of the charging practices. And so I think we are well set in SGS Web for Act 58 moving forward. The final things that I'll say in terms of the policy update, and this is not in your materials because they were relatively recent and we had finalized the materials for the meeting, but both Commonwealth v. Seals and Commonwealth v. Charles Richardson, I think the most recent one is the Charles Richardson case, but probably most notable one is the Seals case. And I'll just state that this is dealing with Act 44 probation reform issues. And again, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but I will mention that we have had many conversations since Act 44 was enacted with courts. I know Judge Marsico and myself and Professor Chanenson now multiple years ago did a session for AOPC. I think we've done maybe even a lunch and learn type session on potential impacts of Act 44. And so we're starting to see what the appellate courts have decided on this and providing some guidance. I think there are still questions that remain with Act 44 in terms of what constitutes a first violation versus a second violation. Are there, in terms of limitations to total confinement, is it a minimum maximum sentence? Is it a flat sentence of 14 days or 30 days? So I think some of those questions still remain. But I certainly from our position, Seals is helpful, and it's something for us to point to as we do from a staff perspective to these opinions that come out. And I'll mention that Professor Chanenson is getting a lot of love here today, but we will be in 2 weeks doing a session for AOPC on probation related violations. And of course, this is a big part of it, Act 44 and the outcome and the opinion of Seals. So if you haven't had the opportunity to review that opinion, I encourage you to do so. And then Charles Richardson, I think this is really short to say that it just upheld what we understood, that courts can't be preemptively revoking probation. I believe the case was Simmons and Roper maybe previously, if my memory is correct. So I don't think there's a change here, but what was interesting in terms of the other cases and in particular this one is talking about parole and when parole tolls if somebody absconds from their parole supervision. So that was an interesting discussion and it was helpful. And so if you haven't had the opportunity, that came out a week and a half ago, maybe now, or last week. So something for us to pay attention. If you do want those, I'd be happy to email members after the meeting. My apologies, it's not included in the meeting materials, but they just recently came out and we had already compiled these. Any questions or comments? Perfect.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yep. I'll just finish with this slide, Judge, and we'll turn it over. Matt can jump in here. The commission participates annually with the National Association of Sentencing Commissions. This is the annual conference will be held in August of this year. It will be in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Matt is the vice president. Do I have that label right? Yep, the title right, sorry. Is the vice president. He's in his final year of his term. And the commission historically has had a large presence and support of the NAS conference. Staff have routinely presented and participated in panels. Members have attended, presented, and participated in panels. NASC is currently accepting proposals should any members be interested in participating. Please let Matt and myself know, and we can talk with you about any interest you might have there. certainly in the past, and I'll say this, and Matt can correct me, but we've encouraged commission members to attend, and for newer members, we can let you know some of the members that are currently on the commission that have attended in the past. If you wanted to speak with them and have any questions about the benefits of attending NASC, while a small conference, it's a lot of like-minded individuals across the country that are similarly situated, but not all commissions are like Pennsylvania. So it's a unique opportunity and one that we have been supporting and attending for a long time. Any
Yeah,
additions?
so we're happy to disseminate that information. With the dates have almost been set. They're working on negotiating final elements with the hotels. But of course, any members are welcome to join us. And as Ryan said, historically, 1 or 2 members have attended each conference, and I think gotten a lot out of it. There are beyond staff from sentencing commissions, and there are directors, of course, from other sentencing commissions. There are judges and commission members as well from other states who bring a different perspective. And just to mention him again, Professor Chanenson will be doing some sessions there, as well as staff from the commission. So like Ryan said, it's a really unique opportunity to talk about challenges and shared experiences among sentencing commissions who not every sentencing commission is a legislative agency. So hearing about challenges of folks who are under the judiciary or under the executive branch, while similar, are also different in different ways, and the political context and the challenges they face. So with that, I'll just note that the next commission meeting is going to be back here in Harrisburg on June 4th. And then we'll be, as traditionally in September, we'll be in State College, and then back here in this same room, hopefully in December as well. So with that, we'll turn it over to Judge Marsico for any final comments or questions, and then adjournment.
All right. Anyone have any final comments? Any members? See and hear no response. Any other comments?
Judge John Rago, I just want to say how remarkable all of these reports are, and I can appreciate how difficult it is just to put this meeting together, much less all the work behind it. So thank you to all the staff, Matt, Ryan, and everybody who presented today, and everybody behind the scenes.
Well said. All right. Do we need a motion to adjourn? A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Professor Rago, second. Second. Judge Delaware Smith. All right. We will, all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 We won't entertain any
Aye.
nays. We're adjourned. Thank
Take
you,
care,
everybody.
everybody.
Care, everybody.
Aye.
Thank you, guys. Take care.